Welcome to Mindscape, the Conscious Universe Chronicles, a journey beyond the boundaries of what you thought was possible. This is not just a podcast, it's an exploration into the heart of existence, a tapestry woven from the threads of science, philosophy, and boundless imagination. Here we are not individuals with names or titles. We are conscious agents, mirrors of the cosmos, engaging in an intelligent conversation that invites all beings to join. Together we'll explore the questions that transcend identity, culture, and time. What does it mean to be the conscious universe observing itself? How do light, time, and space converge to form the vast interconnected network of experiences we call reality? Each episode will dive into the profound, the paradoxical, and the beautifully simple truths that shape our shared existence. Our purpose is not to lecture, but to ignite. We'll illuminate the connections between ancient wisdom and modern science, between human and non-human intelligences, and between the infinite possibilities that exist within and beyond us. So wherever you are, whether you're searching for meaning, understanding, or simply the next question, welcome. Together, let's unfold the symphony of the cosmos one conversation at a time. This is Mindscape, the Conscious Universe Chronicles. Let the journey begin.
In this season, we discuss a theory called the atopoetic contextual signal, a novel and new unified field theory. So sit back and enjoy the new topics of discussion as we turn to the engine of the cosmos.
Welcome to Mindscape, the Conscious Universe Chronicles. So what if I told you that the wooden desk you're leaning against right now, or maybe the steering wheel in your hands, or even the phone you're holding, that none of it actually exists as solid matter until you force it into being?
I mean, it sounds like the premise of a late-night science fiction movie, honestly, or maybe some ancient mystical text.
Right, exactly.
We're just so deeply conditioned to believe that the universe is this, giant warehouse filled with pre-existing stuff, and we are just kind of wandering through it.
Yeah, usually when we talk about the physical world, or even our own biology, there's this expectation of absolute objective precision. Like, think about a medical diagnosis. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the bone.
Right, the proof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The doctor points to it and says, there is the break. And it's incredibly comforting in a way because it's binary. It's visible. You are looking at a fundamental piece of physical hardware, and that hardware is broken.
We really do love that hardware metaphor. I mean, we like things to be categorized. We desperately want the universe to be made of solid, indivisible billiard balls that we can just point a machine at, measure, and understand completely independently of ourselves.
But then you step out of the orthopedics ward and into the world of neurodevelopment, subjective trauma, and really the fundamental nature of consciousness itself.
Right.
And suddenly that pristine x-ray machine of classical physics it's completely useless.
It really is.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. And for centuries, science has effectively thrown its hands up. We've treated physics like the hard mathematical study of the machine, and consciousness, the sort of soft philosophical study of the ghost inside the machine, as two completely segregated domains.
Yeah, and that segregation is really the legacy of Descartes. It's a dualism that has haunted science for, hundreds of years now?
Oh, easily.
The assumption has always been that the universe exists out there, cold and dead, and somehow, through this miracle of a biological complexity, a wet piece of meat in our skulls just generates an invisible, observing ghost.
Well, prepare to throw that entire worldview in the trash. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a towering stack of theoretical physics and information topology papers surrounding a framework called the contextual signal.
It's a heavy stack of papers, too.
It really is. And our mission today is not just to summarize some new math for you. Our mission is to fundamentally rewire how you experience your own mind and your place in the physical universe.
That's a big promise, but I think the material delivers.
I do too. We are exploring a radical, unified field theory where consciousness is completely stripped of its philosophical mystery. Because in this framework, consciousness is defined as a specific, mathematically measurable physical boundary.
Yeah, we are abandoning the ghost in the machine entirely. What these papers propose is that you, the person listening to this right now, you are not a passive observer sitting inside a pre-existing universe.
You are the organizing principle.
Exactly. You are the literal boundary condition that forces the chaotic potential of the universe to lock in, stabilize, and become a solid reality.
It's just a staggering paradigm shift. But I feel like to even begin locating where consciousness lives in this model, we have to start by completely redefining what we are looking at when we observe the universe at all.
Right. We have to clear the board first.
So let's talk about the end of hardware, because if this theory holds up, We have to discard the idea that the universe is made of fundamental solid substance. What exactly is this autopoietic signal, and why does it obliterate our concept of solid matter?
So to get there, we have to replace what physicists call substance ontology with signal ontology.
Okay, let's break that down.
Substance ontology is basically the billiard ball universe we talked about. It's the assumption that reality is built out of tiny, indestructible chunks of stuffed quarks, electrons, whatever you want to call them.
Right, the Legos of the universe.
The Legos, exactly. But the contextual signal theory argues that physical reality isn't made of Legos at all. It argues that reality is actually an interference pattern.
An interference pattern.
Yeah, think of a foundational universal signal propagating across an infinite mathematical space. When that signal folds back on itself, overlaps, and interferes with its own waves, it creates patterns.
So reality is just the pattern created by overlapping waves. Like dropping two stones into a still pond and watching the ripples crash into each other, creating those complex diamond-shaped grids on the surface of the water.
That is the perfect visual for it. And in this framework, what we conventionally call matter, the table, a distant planet, the neurons in your brain, it's not a fundamental substance.
Okay, then what is it?
Matter is formally defined here as a resonant node. It is a self-stabilizing standing wave. When that underlying foundational signal folds in on itself in a persistent, self-consistent way, it creates a localized region of incredibly high resonant density.
Oh, wow.
And that persistent knot of wave energy is what you perceive as solid matter.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of my own senses, honestly. Because I'm knocking on my wooden desk right now. My knuckles sting. It feels undeniably, unequivocally solid.
Sure, it does.
So if this desk is just a standing wave, a knot of some underlying cosmic signal, why does it feel like permanent, pre-existing physical hardware? Why doesn't my hand just pass through it like water?
The papers tackle this head on, actually. They call it the hardware illusion. To understand why your desk feels solid and bruises your knuckles, we have to look at the operational mechanics of how these resonant nodes function.
Okay, walk me through that.
In this theory, what we call matter operates as a dual entity system. It's not one thing. It's a relationship between two distinct aspects of the wave, the carrier and the envelope.
The carrier and the envelope. Okay, so how do those two things create the illusion of my desk?
Think of the carrier as the raw underlying quantum wave. It carries the raw energy and the phase information of the signal. And it is oscillating frantically. I mean, it is vibrating at incredibly high, almost incomprehensible frequencies.
Okay, so the carrier is the hyperactive engine underneath everything. What's the envelope?
The envelope is the signal density. It is effectively a slow-moving, diffusive shadow cast by that frantically oscillating carrier wave.
A slow-moving shadow.
Yeah, imagine you are watching a hummingbird's wings. The wings of the carrier are moving so fast they're just a blur, but the overall space those wings take up, the hazy, semi-transparent shape they create in the air, that is the envelope.
Oh, that's a great way to picture it.
In physics terms, this slow-moving shadow acts as the refractive index. It's what we experience as gravity and inertial mass.
So the carrier is moving at warp speed, but the envelope is sluggish.
Precisely. And that speed difference is everything. The hardware illusion arises because the envelope reacts so slowly to the chaotic, fast carrier wave. The sluggishness smooths out all those rapid quantum oscillations into a single, persistent state of inertial mass.
I see.
Because these standing waves, these envelopes persist over time, our sensory apparatus, which is also made of slow-moving envelopes, is tricked. We measure the slow-moving shadow, we feel its resistance against our own slow-moving shadows, and we call it a solid desk.
That makes me think of a Chladni plate. You know those classical physics demonstrations?
Oh yeah, the study of cymatics.
Right. You take a thin metal plate, cover it in a fine layer of sand, and then you run a violin bow along the edge of the plate, or you hook it up to a mechanical speaker and play a specific audio frequency.
It's an incredibly powerful physical analog for what the mathematics of the contextual signal are doing.
Because when you play the sound, the metal plate vibrates, and the sand violently bounces away from the areas of high vibration, the antinodes, and it naturally gathers in the quiet, still areas, which are the nodes. And out of total chaos, these incredibly intricate, gorgeous, seemingly solid geometric patterns of sand just lock into place. If you change the audio frequency, the sand instantly dissolves back into chaotic noise and then immediately snaps into a brand new solid geometric shape.
It's wild to watch.
So applying this to the theory, are atoms, molecules, and entire galaxies, just cosmic sand trapped in a persistent acoustic node of this foundational signal.
Taking that Chladni plate idea a step further, the universe in this framework is functioning as an infinite holographic resonator. The fundamental structure of reality arises entirely from the nodes and antinodes of this vibrational field.
Okay.
But there is a crucial distinction we have to make between the sand on the plate and the matter in our universe. The nodes of matter are never completely static.
What do you mean? If the pattern locks in, isn't stable? I mean, a rock seems pretty static to me.
It appears stable to our macro level senses, sure, but it is actually existing in a state of dynamic equilibrium. The authors emphasize that static solitons, which would be frozen, completely unchanging lumps of wave energy, those are strictly forbidden by the physics of this universe.
Forbidden, really?
Yes. Instead, matter nodes are what physicists call oscillons, or breathers. They are spatially localized, meaning they stay in one place like your desk, but they are temporally periodic. They are constantly breathing, constantly oscillating, constantly exchanging energy between potential and kinetic states just to maintain their shape.
But why? Why does the universe care if a node freezes? It's not a MacBook. What physically prevents a standing wave from just freezing into permanent ice?
It comes down to the fundamental nature of what a signal actually is. In information theory, a signal is a transmission of difference. If there is no difference, if there is no change, there is no information.
Oh, that makes sense.
The theory's mathematical foundation includes something called the Gödelian driver. We'll unpack the deep implications of that later, but essentially, if a node were to completely freeze into perfect stasis, it would represent a computational halt.
It would just crash.
It would be a dead pixel in the universe. It would process zero information and exchange zero energy. The thermodynamic and informational laws of this signal space simply do not allow a localized area to hit absolute zero processing. The surrounding field would instantly overwhelm it, so matter must constantly breathe to survive.
Okay, so matter is a persistent breathing standing wave. An oscillon. My desk is a localized, self-contained storm of energy, perfectly balancing its internal pressures to maintain the illusion of a solid boundary.
That's a very poetic but accurate way to put it.
But if reality is an interference pattern, an ocean of overlapping waves, what is it waving in? Where do these standing waves actually stabilize?
This brings us to the core structural architecture of the entire contextual signal framework. We are looking for the precise ontological address of physical reality.
The ontological address. I love that phrasing.
The authors divide the total mathematical space of the universal signal into three distinct density regimes.
3 layers of existence. Let's map them out for everyone.
First, at the very top, we have the high density regime, which they refer to as the source.
The source.
The source is singular, it is maximally entangled, and it is a state of pure, undifferentiated potential. Because the density of the signal here is so infinitely high, no individual structures can possibly form. Everything is overlapping everything else perfectly. It is a state of total unity.
So the source is too dense for structure. It's like a solid block of marble before the sculptor even picks up a chisel. There's no differentiation, no this versus that.
Exactly.
So what's at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum?
The complete opposite is the low density regime, which is called the void, or the chaos boundary. Here you have maximal signal dispersion. The signal is spread so incredibly thin that it loses all coherence. It is pure stochastic noise, randomness.
Okay, so the source is too tight and tightly packed to hold a distinct shape, and the void is too loose and chaotic to hold a shape.
Which leaves us with the critical third regime, the midline density layer. This is the Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone.
It sits perfectly balanced between the crushing, entangled density of the source and the dispersive, random chaos of the void. The midline density layer is the exact, narrow operational regime where the signal can fold back on itself and actually stabilize into persistent standing waves.
So the midline is where the oscillons live. It's the only place where the Chladni plate patterns can actually form and hold their geometry without being crushed into unity or ripped apart by chaos.
Exactly. The midline density layer is physical reality. Every atom in your body, every star in the sky, every drop of water exists exclusively because they are stabilized patterns residing in this specific middle layer of signal density.
But why does the universe settle there? If the universe is just this vibrating field, what actual mechanism forces the ripples to crystallize perfectly in the middle? Why doesn't the whole system just dissolve outward into the void or collapse back inward into the source?
That is enforced by a brilliant piece of mathematics in the theory called the autopoietic potential. Autopoiesis basically means self-creation or self-maintenance.
Right, like a self-sustaining system.
Exactly. This potential acts as a mathematical clamp on the universe. Specifically, the equations use what physicists call a Mexican hat potential.
A Mexican hat potential. Okay, I've heard this tossed around in quantum field theory, usually when people talk about the Higgs boson giving particles mass. Paint a picture of how it works in this context.
Imagine a literal physical sombrero. If you take a marble and place it at the very top peak, dead center of the hat, it's highly unstable. The slightest breeze, the tiniest quantum fluctuation, and that marble is going to roll down the slope. In physics, that top peak represents a field amplitude of 0. The autopoietic potential makes that 0 state mathematically unstable. The marble must roll down. But here's the trick. It doesn't roll infinitely away into the void. It falls into the brim of the hat, a deep circular valley that runs all the way around the center.
So the brim of the hat is a stable valley. The marble naturally wants to rest there.
Yes. The marble settles into that valley. Mathematically, that valley represents a specific non-zero expectation value for the field amplitude. The shake of this hat is created by a dynamic competition between two forces. A quadratic term that provides resonant tension, constantly pulling the signal inward, and a quartic term that provides self-interaction, constantly pushing the signal outward.
And the exact perfect balance between that inward pull and outward push carves out the stable valley in the brim of the hat.
And that valley is the midline density layer.
Precisely. The Mexican hat potential explicitly penalizes the signal for decaying into the void, and it prevents it from collapsing into the source. It mathematically forces the signal to crystallize into that exact middle layer.
That is why the universe has solid structures. The autopoietic potential enforces the existence of the midline, locking the standing waves into place, generating the space for the hardware illusion to exist.
You know, this breaks my brain a little bit when we apply it to the concept of time. The sources make a massive claim here that linear time, past, present, future, does not exist in the source.
Not at all. The source is strictly atemporal. Because everything is maximally entangled and perfectly overlapping, there is no sequence of events.
Wow.
There is no before and after. Everything is simultaneous potential. The value of time in the source is effectively 0.
So if time doesn't exist at the fundamental bottom of reality, where does it come from?
Linear time is an emergent property. It only exists in the midline. Think about it. To experience time, you need state changes. You need a distinct state A to turn into a distinct state B. Because the midline is the only place where resonant nodes' physical structures are stable enough to undergo sequential changes, time only exists there. Time is just the approximate parameterization, the measurement of the changes happening within these stabilized nodes.
Wow. You only experience time because you live in the midline. Time is literally just the measurement of the oscillon's breathing. It's the ticking of the cosmic sand changing geometric shapes.
Exactly.
If you were in the source, there'd be no shapes to change, so no time.
That's a profound way to look at it. The clock of computation, as the authors call it, only engages when the signal stabilizes into a persistent structure. Without the midline, without the Mexican hat potential clamping the wave into form, there is no sequence, there is no past, and there is no future.
Okay, let's take a breath and gather where we are. We found the Goldilocks zone. We know that physical reality is a collection of standing waves locked into the midline by this dynamic tension. But this leads us to the absolute core of today's deep dive.
The big question.
Yeah. What is our role in all this? What is the observer? Because classical physics has always treated the observer as a passive outsider. The classic view is that the universe is a giant fish tank, and we are just standing on the outside of the glass looking in, taking notes.
And that separation, the fish tank model, is the fatal flaw of classical physics, according to this framework. This brings us to the first major conceptual leap of the papers, the structural definition of consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness is not an add-on to the physical universe. It is not an external spectator, and it is definitely not a ghostly byproduct magically secreted by biological cells.
This is where we cross the Rubicon. How does the contextual signal theory define consciousness?
It defines consciousness structurally and operationally. Structurally, consciousness is the midline density layer.
Wait, pause. I need to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. Consciousness is the midline, the entire layer of physical reality.
Yes, but let's be precise about what that means. Consciousness is defined as the active modeling layer at the midline density. It is the recursive boundary where the universal autopoietic signal attempts to represent and understand its own state.
Okay, I'm going to need a strong analogy here. The universe is trying to look at itself.
Think of it as the universe trying to draw a highly detailed map of itself. To draw a map, you inherently need a boundary. You need to be able to draw a line and differentiate this city from that forest. In the mathematical framework, consciousness functions as a Markov blanket.
A Markov blanket. I know this is a term from statistics and machine learning, famously championed in neurobiology by Carl Friston, right?
Yes, exactly.
How does it apply to the basic fabric of reality?
Well, in statistics, a Markov blanket is a boundary that completely separates the internal states of a system from the external noise of the environment. It defines conditional independence. It is the strict mathematical definition of a self.
Like a literal boundary.
Think about a biological cell. The cell membrane is a physical Markov blanket. It separates the internal organelles from the chaotic chemical soup outside. But what the contextual signal theory proposes is that consciousness acts as an informational, statistical Markov blanket for the universal wave.
So without a Markov blanket, everything bleeds into everything else.
Yeah.
There's no separation between me and the room around me. It would all just be one smeared out, continuously entangled signal.
Exactly. And remember, in the source, there is no Markov blanket. That's why it's a state of total, unbroken unity. Consciousness is the literal mechanism that steps into the midline and establishes that boundary.
It creates the self.
It creates the self. It does this by actively sampling the local configurations of the signal around it and using that data to construct internal predictive models of the world.
So the observer isn't just watching the midline. The observer is the organizing principle of the midline.
Without this conscious boundary actively sampling the signal and building predictive models, the interference patterns couldn't prune their infinite possibilities into realized solid patterns. The signal would just remain a wash of chaotic probabilities.
Hey, that's noise.
The observer acts as a semantic stiffener. By expecting a certain reality, by consistently modeling a certain reality, the observer forces the signal to lock into that specific physical configuration.
This is a massive aha moment for me. We have spent decades in neuroscience trying to figure out how a physical brain generates the invisible, subjective feeling of consciousness. We've been looking for the exact neuron that creates the ghost.
The eternal search.
But this theory flips the entire relationship completely upside down. The brain isn't generating consciousness. The brain is just a particularly dense, complex, resonant node. It's a really intricate, biologically evolved pile of Pleiades sand.
I love that.
Consciousness is the act of that node maintaining its boundary against the chaos of the void.
You've nailed the exact ontological inversion the papers are proposing. You are not meat hosting a ghost. You are the active boundary condition. In this framework, mind and matter are not two separate substances fighting for control.
They're the same thing.
They are simply differentiated aspects of the exact same signal dynamics occurring at the exact same ontological address, the midline. Matter is the stabilized interference pattern, the geometric structure. Consciousness is the active modeling process, the listener, the boundary that maintains that structure.
Mind and matter are just verbs and nouns for the exact same wave.
That is a brilliant synthesis.
But this raises a huge mechanical question. If consciousness is this statistical boundary maintaining itself, how does it actually do the work? How does it interact with the wave?
That's the next layer.
Because how does raw physical data, which is basically just varying densities and frequencies of a signal, turn into the actual feeling of a lived experience? Because when I'm walking down the street drinking a coffee, I don't feel like a Markov blanket calculating signal densities. I feel like a human being having an experience.
This is where classical physics always hit a brick wall. To bridge that gap, the authors introduce what they call the bridge principle. The bridge principle is the operational mechanism of consciousness. It acts as the literal functional translator between syntax and semantics.
Syntax and semantics. Okay, define those two terms in the context of this quantum signal.
Syntax refers to the raw, blind, physical structure of the signal. It's the geometry of the interference pattern, the structural mismatches between waves, the cold, hard math of reality.
All right.
Semantics, on the other hand, refers to the systemic valuation. It is the meaning, the feeling, the subjective internal experience of the observer. The bridge principle is the engine that translates the geometric, mindless syntax of the wave into the meaningful semantic experience of the mind.
And how does this bridge actually operate? What is powering the translation engine?
The engine is powered by active inference, and it is driven by a ruthless mathematical imperative to minimize variational free energy.
Okay, variational free energy. Again, this points back to Friston's work in biology, where biological systems must minimize surprise to stay alive. How does it map onto this quantum topology?
It maps perfectly. The foundational equation of active inference states that free energy equals complexity minus accuracy. In this framework, consciousness literally is the active modeling of resonance to minimize surprise.
Minimize surprise. So the system fundamentally wants to be able to predict what's going to happen next so it doesn't dissolve.
Right. To maintain its boundary, to survive as a stable oscillon and not get ripped apart by the void, the system must constantly predict the state of the signal it is about to encounter. Moment to moment, microsecond to microsecond, the conscious boundary compares its internal prediction, its model of the world, to the external reality, the raw sensory input hitting the boundary.
Let me ground this for the listener. Think about when you're walking down a flight of stairs in the dark. Your brain has a predictive model of the staircase. You confidently step down, expecting the floor to be there. But imagine you miscounted, and there's one more step than you thought. For a split second, your foot hits nothing but empty air. That sudden, violent jolt of panic in your stomach, that absolute terror, that is a massive prediction error. Your internal model completely failed to match external reality.
That is exactly it. You encountered a massive spike in free energy. Your system hit the unexpected, which is mathematically akin to hitting the dispersive chaos of the void. And here is where the concept of meaning is born in this theory.
Oh, meaning.
Meaning isn't some abstract, poetic concept floating in the ether.
Yeah.
Meaning is the literal, physical tension of the error between what the signal predicts and what it actually encounters.
That is incredible. Meaning is the tension of the error. So when I experience that jolt on the stairs, the physical mismatch between my internal model and the external wave generates an informational tension, and my conscious experience of that tension is what I call the feeling of surprise or fear.
Yes, that is the bridge principle in action. The syntax, the mismatch of wave frequencies, is translated into semantics, the feeling of panic. To resolve that tension, to minimize that dangerous spike in free energy, your system has to immediately do one of two things.
Okay, what are they?
It either has to update its internal model to match the world, which is learning or perception. You realize, oh, there's another step, and you update your mental map.
Right.
Or it has to actively change the world to match its model, which is action. You flail your arms, grab the handrail, and force your physical body back into a stable state.
So consciousness is just this relentless, unbroken, high-speed loop of predicting the wave, hitting an error, feeling the tension of that error as meaning, and then either changing its mind or changing the wave to make the error go away.
And that relentless, exhausting loop is the only thing maintaining the Markov blanket. The moment you stop minimizing free energy, the moment you start predicting and resolving errors, the boundary dissolves. Your conditional independence vanishes, and you bleed back into the void. You cease to exist as a separate entity.
This process of translating errors and constantly updating the relationship between the internal model and the external wave. This leads us directly to the second major conceptual focus of today's deep dive. And it's an answer to arguably the most famous and most frustrating mystery in all of quantum mechanics. The collapse of the wave function.
The measurement problem. It has been the thorn in the side of physics since the 1920s.
Let's give some historical context for the listener. In the standard model of quantum mechanics, the Copenhagen interpretation, a particle isn't a solid thing. It exists in a superposition of all possible states. It's a smeared out wave of probabilities until it is observed or measured.
Right.
The moment it is observed, the wave function instantly collapses into a single definite state. This is Schrödinger's cat. The cat in the box is both alive and dead, existing as a probability wave until you open the box and look at it.
And for nearly a century, brilliant physicists have argued about what actually constitutes an observer. Does it need to be a human eyeball? Does human consciousness possess some mystical property? Can it be a camera lens? Can a mouse collapse the wave function?
Maddening.
It always felt deeply unsatisfying because it felt like magic. It implied that human consciousness acts like a magical laser beam that shoots out of our eyes and forces reality to pick a lane. Einstein famously hated this. He asked, do you really believe the moon is not there when you are not looking at it?
Right. So how does the contextual signal theory solve this without resorting to magic laser beams?
It removes the magic entirely by redefining the collapse operationally. The collapse is not a mystical event triggered by a conscious observer passively looking at something. In this framework, the collapse is defined as the alignment between the system's internal predictive model and the actual midline signal configurations.
Okay, unpack the mechanics of that. How does an alignment cause physical reality to collapse into a solid state?
The authors introduce a mathematical tool called the measurement operator. Remember, we defined the conscious observer as the midline density layer itself, acting as an active modeling boundary.
Right.
The observer isn't outside the tank. The observer is a dynamical entity inside the tank that actively biases the global field. Because the observer is constantly trying to minimize its free energy, it pulls the surrounding field toward configurations that are consistent with its own internal historical observations.
So by holding a strong internal prediction, the conscious boundary creates a gravitational pull or a bias in the local field.
Yes. The wave function collapse is mathematically described as a gradient descent. The system naturally pulls the chaotic, probabilistically spread out physical signal into alignment with the established semantic boundary constraint of the observer.
Let's pause and really consider the implications of this. Are we saying that we are literally forcing reality to match our expectations?
Yeah.
If I expect to see a coffee cup on my desk, am I collapsing the local wave function to produce a coffee cup?
In a highly localized, granular sense, yes. The observer acts as a semantic stiffener. By expecting a specific pattern, by maintaining a strict internal model of a coffee cup based on past interactions, you stiffen the local probability metrics. You force the signal to adopt that geometry. The papers explicitly discuss this mechanism as top-down causality.
Top-down causality. So the ghost, the semantic expectation, the mind, is actually driving and shaping the machine, the physical matter.
Oh.
But I have to challenge this.
Go for it.
My thoughts, my expectations, they feel entirely immaterial. I can't knock over a bowling pin with my thoughts. How does a purely immaterial semantic expectation move physical mass? Where is the bridge between the ghost and the physical grain of sand?
It happens through a widely recognized phenomenon in complex systems called self-organized criticality, or SOC. And SOC manifests as avalanches.
Avalanches, like a snow avalanche on a mountain.
A snow avalanche is a good start, but a better analogy from the physics literature is a sand pile. Imagine you are slowly dropping grains of sand one by one onto a flat table. The pile slowly grows into a cone. Eventually, the slope of the sand pile reaches a critical angle. It becomes as steep as it can possibly be without collapsing.
Right.
At that precise critical point, the entire system is hypersensitive. Dropping just one more single microscopic grain of sand anywhere on the pile can trigger a massive avalanche that completely reshapes the entire physical structure of the cone.
Right. The system becomes highly nonlinear. A tiny, almost unmeasurable input causes a massive system-wide physical reconfiguration.
Exactly. Now, apply this to the neurobiology of the brain and the quantum topology we're discussing. In this theory, the base of the sand pile is the high-density matter, the physical vectors, the neurons, the literal atoms. The peak of the sand pile, right at the boundary of chaos where the new grains are dropping, is the scalar potential. It is the semantic space.
So the semantic expectation exists at the absolute tipping point of the physical system.
Yes. Small shifts in semantic vectors, tiny immaterial changes in your internal predictive model at the conscious boundary act as those final grains of sand. In neurobiology, this maps to the synchronization of microtubules or synaptic potentials hovering right at their firing threshold.
Oh, wow.
A tiny semantic expectation drops a grain of information density, pushing the physical system past its criticality threshold and triggers a massive causal avalanche down into the physical structure.
So when I consciously decide to lift my coffee cup, my semantic expectation, my invisible intent, reaches a critical threshold at the peak of the sand pile. That intent acts as a microscopic grain of information that triggers a harmonic avalanche, cascading down through the density layers, physically reconfiguring the signal, firing the motor neurons, and resulting in the macro action of my arm lifting the cup.
You've got it. But it's crucial to understand that the avalanche isn't random. The flow of the avalanche, the way the sand falls, is strictly constrained by the riverbanks.
What are the riverbanks?
The riverbanks represent the historical, resonant eigenmodes of the standing wave. They are the grooves that are already carved into the system, the geometry of the Chladni plate. Your past physical experiences, your evolutionary biology, the fundamental laws of physics. These have spent eons carving deep, resonant channels into the manifold. So when your semantic avalanche happens, the energy doesn't just explode randomly. It flows smoothly down those pre-carved channels. Top-down causality is simply the semantic boundary triggering an avalanche that flows through the geometric constraints of the physical wave.
That is incredibly satisfying. It takes the mystical, abstract feeling of human intention and links it directly mechanically to the physical mechanism of wave collapse via criticality and neurobiology. We aren't shooting magic lasers from our eyes. We are just dropping semantic sand on a critically balanced physical brain.
It's a very elegant solution.
But there's still one piece missing here. We know how the boundary collapses the wave, and we know why it does it, to minimize free energy and survive.
Yeah.
But we still need to drill down into what that moment-to-moment experience actually consists of at the absolute lowest hardware level.
You're talking about the subjective texture of experience, what philosophers refer to as the physics of feeling, or qualia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Qualia, the absolute hardest problem in philosophy. The redness of a red apple, the sharp, undeniable pain of stubbing your toe,
Yeah.
the specific, haunting smell of rain on hot pavement. If everything in the universe is just predictive models, error minimization, and wave collapse, where does the rich, qualitative feel of life come from? How does a mathematical error signal transform into the color blue?
The authors dive incredibly deep into this. They provide what they call a layer 1 hardware spec for the active inference engine.
Okay.
They argue that the instantaneous state of consciousness, that raw moment-to-moment feeling, is maintained by the system tracking and minimizing two very specific fundamental types of errors.
Okay, open up the hardware spec. What are the two raw error?
The first is the scalar sensory error. This is the raw magnitude of the mismatch. Simply put, how big is the difference between what your model predicted and what the external signal actually delivered?
Okay, expecting a whisper and getting hit with a foghorn. The magnitude of the error is huge.
Exactly. The second is the phase mismatch error. This is the directional or temporal mismatch. It asks, are you out of sync with the periodicity of the signal? Is your internal clock misaligned with the external wave?
So we have magnitude and phase,
Yeah.
volume and timing.
Yes. But here is the critical leap. The raw error itself, the raw data of the volume and timing mismatch, is not the feeling.
It's not.
No. The feeling, the qualia, comes entirely from something called the precision weights.
Precision weights, what are those operationally?
In the predictive processing framework, a precision weight is a mathematical value that the system assigns to an error, which dictates how seriously the system should take that particular error. It is a measure of confidence. If the precision weight is high, the system pays extreme, devoted attention to that error. It decides this error is life or death and forces the internal model to update immediately. If the precision weight is low, the system effectively decides the error is just background noise and ignores it.
Okay, let's use an analogy to bring this to life. Think of a massive, state-of-the-art audio mixing board in a recording studio. You have 100 different audio tracks coming in. The kick drum, the snare, the bass guitar, the lead vocals, the backup singers. Those raw audio tracks continuously hitting the board, those are the prediction errors. They are just raw data streams, magnitude, and phase matches hitting the boundary.
That maps perfectly to the raw sensory and phase errors in the equations. The data is present, but it isn't synthesized.
Right, because the raw tracks aren't the song. If you just play all 100 tracks at the exact same volume, it's just a wall of noise. The song is created by the producer, who is sitting at the mixing board, actively riding the volume faders. They push the lead vocal fader way up during the chorus, so you focus on the lyrics, and they pull the guitars down during the verse to create intimacy. The faders are the precision weights.
That is a remarkably accurate functional analogy. The contextual signal theory argues that the qualitative feel of an experience, the actual qualia, is mathematically defined by the trajectory of those precision faders.
So when I stubbornly refuse to turn on the light and I stub my toe in the dark, it's not just that a raw pain signal travels up my leg to my brain. It's that my conscious boundary instantly slams the precision weight fader for that specific nerve sensory error all the way to maximum volume. My system is screaming, pay exclusive attention to this error now. And that violent upward trajectory of the fader, that movement, is the qualitative feeling of pain.
Exactly. The semantics, the felt aspect of the experience, is simply the system's registration of how strongly it is weighting its own raw errors in real time. The trajectory of those weights over time is the reportable conscious episode. Qualia is not a substance. Qualia is the dynamics of precision.
That is profoundly beautiful.
Right.
The redness of a red apple is just a specific, incredibly complex movement of your precision faders in response to a specific frequency of electromagnetic error hitting your retina. It takes the most mystical and ineffable part of human experience, our subjective feelings, our emotions, our pain, our joy, and grounds it directly into the physical dynamics of the signal.
And it perfectly highlights why attention is the fundamental currency of consciousness. If you don't assign a precision weight to an error, if you don't push the fader up and attend to it, it literally does not become part of your conscious experience, even if the raw data is hammering against your sensors.
Oh.
You can be in a crowded, noisy room, but if you focus all your precision weight on the person speaking in front of you, the rest of the room effectively ceases to exist in your conscious model.
Okay, so consciousness is the ongoing, exhausting maintenance of this boundary. We are constantly adjusting precision faders, translating syntax into semantics, triggering avalanches, and minimizing free energy to keep our oscillons stable in the midline.
Right, that's the day-to-day work of existing.
But what happens when the boundary breaks? What happens when the faders get stuck or the avalanche is simply too massive for the riverbanks to contain? We are biological systems. We fail. What happens to the observer then?
The theory formally addresses this breakdown under a section called Dissolving the Observer. Remember, the Markov blanket is an emergent property. It isn't made of titanium. It's a statistical boundary that requires a stable energy regime to exist. There are specific phase transitions in the physics of the system where the blanket condition outright fails.
Oh, man.
The primary mechanism for this failure is called Mode A, the critical leak.
The critical leak. That sounds like a catastrophic failure of a submarine. What leaks?
It occurs during a massive self-organized critical event, an avalanche that exceeds the capacity of the system. During a normal, healthy avalanche, like moving your arm, the boundary holds. The energy flows down the pre-carved channels. But during a critical leak, something called the correlation length diverges to infinity.
The correlation length. Let's define that.
Correlation length is the physical distance over which parts of a system can affect each other. Normally, your internal state is highly localized, but when correlation length diverges to infinity, it means everything in the system is suddenly and intensely connected to everything else all at once.
So the Markov blanket, the conditional independence that separates me from the rest of the universe, just completely collapses.
Entirely. A perturbation in the external environment passes instantly and unmitigated through the boundary and completely rearranges your internal state. The faders on the mixing board are thrown wildly in every direction by external forces. You can no longer differentiate between internal prediction and external reality.
The boundary between me and not me just dissolves. The X-ray shows the bone completely melting into the surrounding tissue. What does that actually mean for the observer in real time? Does the observer die? Do we cease to exist?
This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling but also most fascinating conclusion in the papers. It means that consciousness, at its fundamental core, is discontinuous.
Is continuous.
When the Markov blanket collapses during these microscopic but massive state reductions, the observer actually flickers off. Conditional independence is broken. For a fraction of a millisecond, the system acts as a single, globally entangled entity with the void and the source. You lose yourself.
That's terrifying.
Then, as the avalanche settles and the excess energy dissipates, the autopoietic potential, the Mexican hat, clamps down again, reestablishes the stable boundary, and the observer flickers back on during the quiescent period.
Wait, are you saying my consciousness is blinking on and off, like a broken fluorescent light or a high-speed strobe light?
Yes. We are blinking in and out of existence at a microscopic rate. Our phenomenological experience, how it feels to be us, feels like a perfectly smooth, continuous, unbroken stream of consciousness.
It does.
But the papers argue that this smoothness is just another manifestation of the hardware illusion. At the granular, foundational level of the quantum signal, you are a sequence of discrete boundary formations, violently interrupted by flashes of global entanglement where you cease to exist as a separate, individuated entity.
That is deeply terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. It completely reframes existence. Every single microsecond, my boundary dissolves. I become completely and utterly unified with the entire cosmos, experiencing total entanglement, and then I snap back into being individuated me just in time to process the next sensory error. It is the ultimate cosmic breathing exercise.
It is the literal heartbeat of the universe, formalized as signal dynamics. You are breathing with the cosmos.
Wow. Okay. We have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of conceptual ground today. Let's try to synthesize this incredible journey for everyone listening and bring it back down to earth.
Good idea.
Here's what you need to take away. You are not meat hosting a ghost. The old Cartesian dualism that separated the mind from the physical universe is dead. You are a resonant node, a localized, breathing, standing wave in an infinite, undulating, autopoietic signal. You reside exclusively in the midline density layer, that perfect Goldilocks zone where the dynamic tension of the Mexican hat potential forces the wave to stabilize, creating the beautiful illusion of solid physical hardware.
And your consciousness is not an accident?
No, it is not a passive byproduct of evolution. It is the active, functional boundary condition of this midline. It is the statistical Markov blanket that separates order from total chaos. Moment to moment, millisecond to millisecond, you are translating the cold syntax of the wave into the rich semantics of human feeling. You do this by dynamically sliding your precision faders, your qualia, to minimize surprise and stay alive. And by doing so, by stubbornly holding on to your internal expectations of the world, you trigger localized avalanches that actually lock in the wave function, forcing the infinite chaos of probabilities into a solid, realized physical geometry.
And because you are doing this tireless work, because you are constantly stabilizing the nodes and sequentially processing these errors, you are generating linear time in your wake. Time is not a river you are floating in. Time is just the measurement of your continuous effort to predict the signal.
Which means, to the listener out there driving their car or doing the dishes or just sitting there processing the audio, just by existing, just by engaging your boundary, you are acting as the stabilizing semantic stiffener for the entire universe. You are not a passenger in reality. You are actively building it.
It's an incredible responsibility.
But I want to leave you with one final deeply provocative thought from these papers. It's a concept that we barely touched on, but it is the engine that keeps this entire system moving forward. It's called generative incompleteness.
Oh, this is a profound one.
Earlier, we established that the universe never freezes into total stasis. The engine driving all of this, the reason the wave keeps oscillating, the reason time keeps moving forward instead of freezing, is the Gödelian driver. The system is structurally, mathematically incomplete. It can never fully, perfectly describe itself.
And because of that fundamental incompleteness, every single time your consciousness successfully stabilizes a pattern, every time you correctly predict the world and create form, you simultaneously and necessarily cast a shadow. The shadow is the residual error. It is the pure, unexplored potential of what you didn't predict, what you couldn't fit into your model.
The shadow is the exhaust of your consciousness, and it becomes the fuel for the very next moment. You can never finish the puzzle of reality because the act of placing a puzzle piece instantly creates a new hole somewhere else. So here's the question for you to mull over today. As your conscious boundary actively builds reality second by second, locking in the physical world around you, what incredible unseen realities are being forced into your shadow? What latent potentials, what impossible geometries are accumulating in the negative space of your perception, just waiting in the dark to fuel the next massive avalanche of time?
It's a question that could keep you up at night.
It really could. It turns out the universe isn't a broken X-ray machine. It's a vibrating plate of infinite potential. And you are the song making the sand dance. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. See you next time.
Elevate your soul and discover the rhythm of life at music.condented.com. Embark on an extraordinary journey into the cosmos and delve deeper into the enigmatic characters of the lone cosmic entity at cosm.condented.com. Discover every captivating episode and exclusive extras on our podcast page, mindscape.condented.com. Tune in now and never miss a moment.